Now, Natasha McEnroe is back in the news because she's been up before the courts, but every time she comes before the court for sometimes seemingly minor offences, she makes the headlines. And of course, it's because of her ex-partner, Brian Rattigan. She may have split up with him, but she can't get away from the fame that he brought upon her.
I mean, look, she may argue, or her family may argue, if she hadn't been Brian Rattigan's partner, a case like this mightn't have attracted the amount of attention that it does. And in fact, we actually often get criticised if you say, like, wife of celebrity dies. Yeah. You say, why don't you call her Jane Doe? Why do you have to describe her as a wife of a celebrity? So I suppose there is a case to be made. Nonetheless, even in this current case we're talking about in relation to Natasha McEnroe, probably because of the details, it would have made the news anyway, because it is, notable. I suppose.
You're very familiar with her and her whole story and all the rest of it. And we'll just go back a bit and remind ourselves, well, firstly, Brian Rattigan, of course, was one side of the feuding drug gangs that really brought the first cocaine war to the streets of Ireland and Crumlin. He was a childhood friend of a number of people that have come of age, really, Liam Byrne, etc., Fat Freddie Thompson. All of them were sort of school friends together and working together as one gang until there was a drug bust in the Holiday Inn and allegations of touting and, missing money, etc., caused this big war to start. But she was there, Natasha McEnroe, as a very young teenager from the very beginning of all that.
Yeah, like some of the women, she was going out with Brian Rattigan as a teenager. And I suppose in another context, you could speak about, you might say how much the traumas that she will have suffered seeing that gangland war unfold before her very eyes. I mean, at one stage, Brian Rattigan was shot while they were in, two men broke into their home. He was shot while they were in bed together. I think he'd actually gotten out of the bed, and it is believed...
Was he not asleep? He had taken so much drugs or something that she couldn't wake him up. She did try to wake him up and she knew the killers were coming. Yeah. And she ended up sort of barricading herself, I think, into the bathroom. Yeah. But when she sort of peeked out, she realised it was Freddie Thompson and Paddy Doyle, two terrifying people to show up in your bedroom with a gun.
Exactly. I mean, very serious criminal figures in of themselves. And obviously she was a very young woman at that stage, and that was just one incident. Brian Rattigan's brother, Joey Ratigan, was one of the first victims of the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud, sort of very much a innocent enough sort of victim, although he was on the edges of that gang, but a young man who hadn't done a lot. So she would have seen death at all turns. Nonetheless, she stuck with Brian Rattigan through all of that. She used to appear. He was in and out of court for many occasions. Obviously, most notably, he went on trial for the murder of Declan Gavin. He was convicted of that initially. That was overturned on appeal.
Much later,
and he pled guilty to manslaughter.
But at that stage, the Declan Gavin, and of course the murder Declan Gavin was in that abracadabra takeaway. Declan Gavin was his arch rival, wasn't he? And they had fallen out, and they had sort of, they were leading two sides, and he stabbed him to death in front of many people that were there that night in a temper and a frenzy, which is really part of Rattigan's downfall, was that he was incapable of controlling that temper. It got him into trouble again and again. There was planning went into the murder, but it was that chaotic grabbing a knife and driving up to abracadabra, not caring who witnessed it and going for it. Now, when he was jailed for life, she was still going out with him. So she's still a young woman, and he is being sentenced to life imprisonment for murder, which is much later overturned, and he is found guilty that stage, or pleads guilty to manslaughter instead. But she's facing a long wait as a very young woman. Does she stay loyal to him, or what does she do?
Well, I think she had stayed loyal to him through all those years, because he'd been in and out of jail and facing these charges. And she would always appear, and she used to sort of say things in court, and she would always be pictured by the newspapers going in. But at the time at which he was sentenced to life, in 2010, I think Natasha McEnroe, she's now in her early 40s, so she was approaching the end of her 20s, and obviously she decided that she wanted...
Had they children?
They had children, yeah. They had one child, and she had decided that she wanted to move on. She had moved back to a family address in Swan Grove in Rathmines. It was an address that was made famous really by Martin Cahill, who had been in and out of that street.
Had he grown up there? No, he'd
Martin
grown up in
Cahill,
some buildings that were knocked down. Wasn't his family, or he one of the last remaining refused to move out?
They were. But
so Swan Grove was what? He lived there, or?
Well, he had two homes, didn't he?
Yeah.
He had a home, a much posher home with his wife in Cowper Downs, but her sister lived in Swan Grove, and obviously Martin Cahill famously used to, let's say, visit the sister as well.
Yeah.
So she lived on that street coincidentally. And there was a guy who lived across the road called Paul Geraghty. And while Brian Rattigan was in prison over these years, she obviously, fell in love. And at some point in 2010, she went into prison to tell Brian Rattigan that she'd moved on, or she wanted to move on, that, that she wanted to have a life, I suppose. And he went absolutely ballistic. It was described at the time. Smashed up his cell, had to be taken out by prison staff, really took it badly. Like a lot of these guys do. I mean,
because there is an expectation that the women will wait for them, and the women don't tend to make these big, bold, brave decisions. They're, it's a conundrum if you're on the outside, your guy is inside. And sometimes there is an awareness that there's another relationship going on, but once it's not actually spoken about, or the woman won't come into prison and say, right.
No, I mean, on some of these occasions, if the men are getting these really lengthy sentences, and the women may move on in practice, but what they're expected to do would be to continue to visit them in prison once a week, keep up their spirits and say nothing about anything that's going on outside, to bring kids in if that's the case, to mark events, birthdays, etc. So that can happen. The other thing with these guys is, and of course there's a huge variety and loads of different possibilities, and some of these guys are gangsters and are also nice guys in their personal relationships, but I have certainly heard of cases where even after the gangsters break up with the malls are still not allowed to move on, even if the gangster has got himself a new woman. Okay. He still wouldn't be okay with his ex getting a new boyfriend.
So just to, that's the end of you.
That's basically a kind of a life sentence, to an extent. But Natasha McEnroe would not be one of the sort of retiring types. And, by all accounts, is a ballsy, tough character in her own way. And she told him directly that she wanted to move on. Now, he didn't.
Did she tell him who she'd met?
Well, he certainly knew.
Yeah.
We don't know that. And the reason we do know that he knew is because whatever number of months later, Paul Geraghty received a Christmas card from Brian Rattigan with a message, certainly implying that he was keeping his eye on him, let's put it that way.
Right.
And shortly after that, Paul Geraghty and Natasha McEnroe were in their home in Swan Grove when two gunmen in balaclavas, I think, called to the door, came into the house, held her at gunpoint, went upstairs to kill him. He managed to jump out of the first floor window and flee down the road and escaped with his life. And it is, widely believed that was Brian Rattigan who hired those hitmen. One of those hitmen was a guy who'd end up in prison in connection with another serious offence, let's put it that way. And we were told that ultimately he sort of apologised to Natasha McEnroe, said he shouldn't have taken it on, it was too much. And
he knew her,
He knew her, yeah, he knew her.
So he's none too happy about this. And she's been given a really, really stark warning that, you got to wait for me. How does she manage and maneuver that? Because she ultimately kind of wins Brian Rattigan back over, doesn't she? And he calms down, he chills it out, and sort of she goes on to continue this relationship.
She goes on to continue this relationship. I think there was certainly a high level of guard and monitoring of the couple for a long period of time, and it's obviously a very, very serious threat against her life. But yeah, she's a tough character and seemed to stick it out. And ultimately, I think they seem to have resolved their differences. Maybe the passage of time, you could see them. At some point, I do remember somebody showing me that they'd all defriended each other off Facebook, her sort of people and his people, and they were ultimately refriended each other at a later point. Brian Rattigan would come back to court. He would plead guilty to manslaughter. He also, in the middle of all that, got hit with a very hefty sentence for controlling a heroin dealing business from his prison cell. So he served a very lengthy sentence and came out a couple of years ago. Yeah,
so we're talking about 2-3 years he's out, and has been really lying low ever since. There has been certainly intel that he was over and back to Spain, and he has on a number of occasions been seen around the turf of that south inner city that he would have controlled around Basin Street.
And probably still controls, or certainly if not directly controlling a network of dealers, certainly continues to play a role. He hasn't been arrested or charged with any offence, but he has come to the attention of Gardaí, certainly investigating various crimes, and his associates have been involved in a number of violent incidents, but he certainly is believed to have taken a sort of hands-off role.
I thought it was fascinating when he was coming towards the end of his sentence that time, and of course his arch rival Freddie Thompson was just starting his life sentence for the murder of David Daithí Douglas. And sort of as Thompson's coming into prison, Ratigan is ready to sort of be released, and how the fortunes have changed all that while. I suppose really nearly over a decade and a half, Ratigan's in prison while Thompson is floating around the Costa del Sol and doing whatever else he's doing. But they had this very peculiar situation that they basically told prison management that they were okay with one another. They had no beef, and because Thompson wanted to be held in a particular wing, that Ratigan kind of gave the nod and nothing.
I think Freddie Thompson was complaining that he was being kept in solitary confinement as punishment, and that he wanted to be mixed in with the normal population. And the prison authorities said, well, there's threats against his life due to the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud. But they somehow seem to have come together and decided that
to tell prison authorities.
Well, I don't know. Certainly, I think Brian Rattigan has come out of prison and decided that he doesn't want to go back now.
But he also wants to live. And I think there is that sense of he's obviously very paranoid that he will be shot by rivals, or, that there's still old tensions there.
Yeah, there's something in it for him for there to be a degree of peace, and he's able to get on. He certainly forged ties with various criminal figures in prison, and I think he's come out and had a new baby, or probably a couple of years ago at this stage.
So he's a new relationship.
He's a new relationship, and is moving in and out of Dublin on a regular basis. Natasha McEnroe certainly has the relationship with Paul Geraghty has remained. He has come before the courts in recent times in relation to drug seizures. But she obviously this week is back in court herself.
So what's she done this time?
Well, it was I suppose a notable incident in that she was basically, the guards saw this. It's described as a Audi, high-powered Audi, going down the M50, weaving between traffic, driving fast and erratically, and the guards were called. And when they tried to pull her over, she wouldn't stop. And eventually, when she did stop, she sort of jumped across the M50, ran across the M50.
Yes, and her defence would say about her that she she actually, you're right, she ran across the lanes of the motorway, but she had to be restrained over a crash barrier on that M50 toll bridge.
And she was shouting, behaving erratically, and appeared to be under the influence of an intoxicant.
In her defence, the court was told that she was at that point in the depths of an alcohol addiction, and she's been sober for 2 years now. I'm not sure this story would have made headlines if it was somebody we didn't know about. I think it's
look, it might still have made a smaller story because it does hear how the detectives from the Armed Support Unit tried to stop the car and, she fled across it. But it's, again, like, you have to look, 2 years sober, was great. And when you look back on her life, it was a life that she entered as a child. I think she was a couple of years younger than Brian Rattigan, so she would have been in her mid-teens at earliest when she was being surrounded with all of this criminality. Now, if somebody was grown up in a war zone, you would have sympathy for a degree of trauma that she had gone through. So I suppose when you get to a certain age, she's 40 years old now, you would like to think that, something like getting sober would give her another chance. And, she was in that life, I'm sure, before she was making adult decisions at all. And it is very, very hard to exit it. Now, over the years, she has amassed a good few convictions, but many of them in recent times are for relatively minor incidents.
Yes, and likely others related to the drinking issues she had.
Yeah, exactly. And it says
last year she got the Probation Act for shouting
at a guard or something. So really, the type of criminal activity, if for even want of a better word, that people come across when they're in the middle of addiction. And it was described in court this week that she had been in the depths of alcohol addiction at the time. The mother of three had a traumatic childhood and witnessed the death of a number of friends, and that she'd used drink as a coping mechanism and was now sober and had been so since 2023. So, that there is no denying that sort of trauma will have a huge impact on people.
I tell you what, that's Swan Grove. If the walls could talk, it's seen a few things, isn't it?
It has.
Interesting little neighbourhood.
It is right in the middle of Ratigan, effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah, one of the poshest and most. I mean, the cost of houses in Ratigan is phenomenal. So it has witnessed a bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, thanks for that.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.